Dawn sifted into Westbrook, and Claire Anderson moved through her kitchen with practiced quiet. The kettle breathed, the radio hummed, toast clicked up, and a school lunch landed in a neat row while her daughter Emily watched, pretending not to notice the tired glassiness in her mother's eyes. Upstairs, Mark Anderson lay scrolling, his screen a private glow he guarded like a safe. When Claire entered with a pressed shirt, he tilted the phone away and smiled without warmth. "You're up early again," he yawned. And when she said someone had to get the day moving, he added, "Don't overdo it, you aren't getting younger." The words lodged, because repetition polishes cruelty until it looks like truth. She laid out breakfast, kissed Emily's head, and left for the office with the steadiness of a bridge that holds even after something has cracked. At Caradine Logistics, she was the administrative manager whose calendars never slipped and whose emails arrived before questions. Praise came wrapped in expectation, and she answered both with yes. Deadlines piled. She skipped lunch because the report wanted numbers, and numbers wanted precision, and precision devours time. "You okay?" Jenna asked from the next desk, and Claire said fine, the way people say fine when the scaffolding inside them is shaking. By noon, the fluorescent light felt merciless. The screen's letters began to shimmer, and the ache behind her eyes pulsed a metronome she could not slow. She drank coffee and told her body to wait until evening. It did not. The room went soft, sound tunneled. Her hands tingled. She reached for the desk and found air. Papers fanned, a chair scraped, Jenna shouted her name, and then the floor met her with a dull kindness. Sirens replaced the office hum. In the ambulance, a paramedic asked for an emergency contact, and the syllables of her husband's name tasted like metal. At Mercy Hospital, the nurse dialed Mark once, twice, a third time. Voicemail gathered the calls. Across town, laughter rose under chandeliers. Vanessa Cole's birthday had phones, streamers, and a necklace that caught the flash. Mark lifted a glass and declared the night perfect as his pocket trembled with a call he dismissed with his thumb. "Spam," he said, and the table believed him because dessert arrived. Back at Mercy, monitors traced Claire's heartbeat with steady light. The doctor said exhaustion, dehydration, stress, and prescribed rest. Jenna arrived, smoothing Claire's hair with a tenderness that made the room briefly human. Emily texted her mother, then her father, then stared at her feed as new photos from the party marched past fear. The timestamp made denial impossible. When Claire lifted her eyes, she met the pale certainty of a ceiling that would not look away. "We've called your husband," the nurse said gently. "We'll keep trying." Claire nodded, not trusting the machinery of her voice. She thought of the morning's knives disguised as jokes, of shirts ironed from meetings she was never invited to, of a house where silence was currency and she paid exact change. She closed her eyes and let the machine breathe steadiness into the air. In the restaurant, Mark posed with Vanessa while the hospital's missed call log lengthened. In the ward, Jenna squeezed Claire's fingers and said, "We've got you." The sentence landed like a thread across water. Between the beep and the breath, a single stubborn thought lit inside Claire's quiet. Who shows up is the only answer that matters now. Outside, Westbrook kept moving, but inside Claire felt a hinge turn. A quiet beginning that would not be denied by any man. Jenna signed the visitor log with a brisk flourish and walked the corridor beside Claire's gurney as orderlies wheeled her toward diagnostics, translating hospital jargon into kindness, while the nurse adjusted the IV and noted the stubborn silence from the number labeled husband. Claire's thoughts arranged themselves like files on a desk she finally controlled. The doctor spoke in precise sentences: exhaustion, dehydration, acute stress reaction, then asked about support at home. Claire answered with a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. Her phone lay face down on the tray, mute except for Emily's floods of tiny blue bubbles, love compressed into punctuation. Emily saw party posts appear between homework windows and saved each one, screenshots beating onto a string she didn't know how to wear yet. When Mercy Hospital called the house with a gentle voice requesting a guardian, she steadied her breath, wiped her eyes, and said she would come. She stepped through sliding doors and the building opened to her urgency. Claire's face softened at the sight of her girl, and for a moment the tubes and beeps faded behind the simple gravity of hands finding hands. Jenna made room, introduced herself as the office friend who refused to let good people suffer alone, and produced a folder she had collected from HR. Sick leave forms, counseling contacts, the number for patient advocacy. Practical magic, Claire thought, feeling something like strength take a first breath. The nurse tried Mark again, then logged the outcome with the gentleness of someone accustomed to documenting disappointments. Emily wanted to rage, to pour accusations into the phone until it cracked, yet the sight of her mother's pallor remade anger into focus. Together they set tiny goals: finish the broth, sit up for 5 minutes, text Mr. Reynolds that the report would be reassigned. In the low, Claire asked for her handbag and, with a steadiness that surprised her, opened a notes app titled Keeping the Lights On. She listed bills, passwords, the mortgage date, and then a new heading: proof. Under it, she wrote party photos, bank receipts, hospital call log, work emails, and the clinic Jenna mentioned for prenatal testing that answered only to facts. Not revenge, she told herself, recalibrating the word to mean self-respect conducted with evidence. Outside the window, a square of sky brightened. Inside, color returned to her cheeks by imperceptible degrees. Emily curled in the visitor's chair with the blanket, and the fierce stillness was someone learning adulthood in 1 hour. When Mark finally appeared, evening had softened the ward and the scent of antiseptic had surrendered to the quieter perfume of survival. He arrived without flowers, without apology, carrying only the irritation of a man whose schedule had been inconvenienced. "You really had everyone panicking," he said, voice flat as a form letter. Claire watched him as if from a shoreline watching a storm spend itself offshore. Her silence did not invite him in. Jenna stood and introduced herself. Mark offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes and put his phone face down on the windowsill like a trophy. "We'll talk later," he told Claire, already turning away. Rest. The word, so often weaponized, floated between them and failed to land. After he left, Emily exhaled the breath she'd been holding all day, and Claire, feeling the hinge within her swing once more, turned back to her list and wrote the final line of the evening. Who shows up? Note it, keep it, build on it. She would rebuild quietly, piece by piece, until truth stood where excuses once stood for everyone.
The first morning home felt like stepping onto a stage she no longer believed in. Curtains open, neighbors' routines synchronized, the illusion of ordinary life playing on repeat while humiliation moved through rooms like a draft that found every gap. Claire folded hospital discharge papers into the kitchen drawer where warranties went to be forgotten, then stopped and moved them to a folder marked with the sharpness of a new habit: keep. On her phone, the town's theater kept performing. Vanessa's posts chimed with captions crafted for envy, a crystal glass lifted under chandeliers, the necklace catching flash, a manicure cradling a gift bag Claire recognized from a charge she had pleaded to postpone. Comments bloomed with hearts and crown emojis. Someone wrote, "Find a man who treats you right," and the sentence felt like a door closing on a life Claire had funded. At the market, sympathy walked in on stilts, peering down. "How are you holding up?" while eyes slid to her unpainted face and the discount apples. She learned to spend silence like currency, exact change only. That night at dinner, she plated simple food and breathed slow. Mark breezed through the doorway, scented with a cologne that did not belong to their budget, sat and looked at the roast as if it had wronged him. "Vanessa seasons better," he said, the way some people deadbolt doors. Emily's jaw tightened. Her thumbs, hidden beneath the table, tapped the red button on her phone, recording his voice as it climbed a familiar staircase. Weak, needy, old, burden. Each word a rung he believed would keep him above consequence. Claire's fork paused midair. She did not rise to it. She watched the performance that had once cost her tears and now cost her nothing but attention. Later in the bathroom mirror, she met her reflection as if meeting a colleague she respected but had overlooked. Tired, yes. Finished, no. She set a glass of water on the counter and drank the whole thing, a prescription she could honor. On the bed, she opened the notes file she'd titled "Keeping the Lights On" and added separate headings: money, work, health, proof, then nested bullet points like scaffolding. Joint account statements cross-check, suspicious client gift receipts, transfer memos, HR policy on harassment, Mercy hospital call log request, witness list, Jenna, night nurse, security, Mr. Reynolds if needed. The list steadied her like railings on a dark stairwell. Emily knocked, entered, and sat cross-legged, a teenager trying not to cry because adulthood had arrived without asking permission. "Mom," she said, "if we collect things, we won't argue. We'll show." The word "we" brightened the air. Together they reviewed screenshots. Vanessa on Mark's lap, the hour Mercy called. The caption, "Treated like a queen," time-stamped between missed call attempts. A boomerang of champagne while a nurse charted, "Husband unreachable." Claire saved each artifact to a new drive with a password from a life Mark did not know. Her maiden name, her grandmother's street, the exact shade of sky over summers that had healed her once before. She backed up twice because she'd learned disasters multiply when evidence lives in one place. At midnight, she scrolled to a clinic link Jenna had texted. Discreet, clinical, the opposite of gossip, and bookmarked an appointment page as calmly as booking a dentist. Not revenge, she told herself, testing the shape of the thought, but respect, conducted with proof. When she turned off the lamp, the house was loud with small sounds. A fridge cough, a pipe settling, rain starting like a rumor. Mark snored, a man unbothered by the lives that made his comfort possible. In the dark, Claire rehearsed no speeches, practiced no scenes. She counted breaths, matched them to the steady drum of rain, and felt something align, a hinge seating clean. Tomorrow could keep its teeth. Tonight she had water in her veins, a list that would outlast bluster, a daughter who recorded truth, and a new law inside her. The next move would be hers, and it would be quiet, documented, and undeniable.
Claire's plan advanced in increments so small no one thought to look for them. She ate on time, walked the block, answered Jenna's check-ins, and returned to Caradine Logistics steady. Mr. Reynolds called her in, not to question, but to backstop. A lighter workload for 2 weeks, documentation of her collapse, and a standing offer to witness. At lunch, Jenna slid over a manila envelope, patient advocacy contacts, a template for requesting the hospital call log, and the card of a discreet clinic. Claire became a quiet archivist. The bank's export button surrendered months of statements. She highlighted dinners labeled meetings, jewelry tagged client gifts, hotel charges that lined up with nights Emily had eaten alone. She built folders the way a carpenter builds frames, square and ready to bear weight. Emily, fierce in her teenage stillness, synced screenshots to a cloud drive and kept a spreadsheet of dates and captions because memory, they agreed, would not argue as well as math. In the mirror, Claire practiced a neutrality that left Mark nothing to perform against. He took her quiet for defeat and, mistaking mercy for advantage, pressed harder. Late nights, perfume that did not belong to their home, a performance of indifference so polished it squeaked. The hinge inside her held. The week bent toward an afternoon errand at a cafe where the air smelled like almond and sugar. Claire reached the counter just as Vanessa's laughter spiked behind her. The mistress, ringless and radiant, narrated her future for two friends loud enough to audition it for the room. "Once I'm pregnant, I'm the real Mrs. Anderson," he promised. "The wife won't see it coming." The line found Claire's nerves with unerring aim. The spoon in her hand trembled once, then stopped. She paid, walked out, and stood in winter light that made honesty clean. It wasn't only betrayal, it was strategy plotted in public. She texted Jenna, proceeding. That night she opened a new folder, prenatal, and placed inside a clinic appointment, chain of custody instructions, and notes. The test they could run was indirect, anchored to timelines Mark had broadcast himself. It would be enough to place doubt under a microscope. 2 days later, Mark came home humming, buoyant, certain he had arranged the optics to win. He poured a drink, leaned on the island, and announced like a press release, "Good news, Vanessa's pregnant." He waited for the collapse he preferred. Claire set a glass on a coaster and met his eyes with a quiet that made the kitchen larger. "Noted," she said, and turned back to rinse the cup. He called her bitter, warned her not to make it messy, and rehearsed a narrative where she was the problem and he was the man who had bravely outgrown her. The words arrived like an old script. They found no stage. When he slept, she added a witness list to the archive: nurse on duty, Jenna, HR coordinator, bank manager, and drafted a page labeled Statement of Facts. She placed dates beside actions, sources beside claims, attachments beside conclusions. Then she wrote a sentence for herself alone: "Do not explain what the evidence can show." In the morning, she packed a navy dress she hadn't worn since promotion day and ironed it flat, not as costume, but as armor. Rumor delivered an invitation she was never meant to see. Vanessa's baby shower at the Laurel Hall, gold balloons promised, a slideshow cued. Claire slid the card under a magnet on the fridge, a reminder. The stage they built, she thought, will hold the truth as well as their fantasy. Inside the thought, a steady breath stayed.
Claire's week unfurled like a blueprint she no longer apologized for reading. Mornings with water and oats because fuel was not a luxury. Lunch at her desk only if it came with a timer that forced her to stop. Evenings devoted to the quiet craft of assembling truth. Patient advocacy emailed the Mercy Hospital call log as a PDF stamped with date, time, and the words "no answer" repeated like a metronome. She printed 2 copies, slipped one into a clear sleeve, and backed the other to cloud and drive. The bank, persuaded by a calm voice and a precise list of transaction IDs, produced itemized statements. A manager highlighted transfers to a consulting account that shared a recovery email with Mark's private handle. Emily's spreadsheet grew muscular, columns for timestamps, captions, locations, and a match column that aligned Vanessa's birthday posts with the precise minutes Mercy had tried to reach a husband. Mr. Reynolds, old school and unexpectedly tender, offered his presence for whatever came next and quietly reserved his Saturday. If a voice needs to read something aloud, I have diction and a suit. Jenna, practical to her bones, booked a conference room after hours so Claire could test the projector. Emily learned HDMI quirks and saved the slides to 3 formats because redundancy was not pessimism, but preparation. The prenatal clinic called with the kind of courtesy that refuses drama. Their phrasing was clinical and exact, and it gave Claire what she needed most: facts that stood up alone. The draft packet on her table fattened. Exhibit A, hospital call log. Exhibit B, bank statement highlights. Exhibit C, Workplace emails with dates redacted but conduct clear. Exhibit D, social media evidence. Exhibit E, prenatal findings, sealed. Mark, sensing only the surface of her composure, mistook it for surrender and pressed forward with the performance he loved. A Sunday gathering at their house. Relatives piled into the living room. His charm poured like a drink he never paid for. He raised his glass and, with a smirk that practiced superiority, said, "I married a partner and got dead weight." Forks paused mid-air. Aunties exchanged glances. Someone's cough tried to become a protest and failed. Emily's hand found her phone under the table. Record lit red. Claire felt heat crawl her throat and decided to let the sentence live where it could be useful, on tape, not in her bloodstream. She did not argue. She smiled in a way that made room, not noise, and topped off water for a cousin who suddenly needed something to do. When the guests left, Mark delivered a lecture about dignity that sounded like a man reading from a script he'd written to absolve himself. "Don't embarrass me," he said, as if the word had only one direction. Claire washed plates, dried them, and returned to her packet, adding the fresh audio file to a section labeled Pattern. Before bed, she tried on the navy dress she had ironed. Zipped clean, fell straight, held her without apology. The invitation to Vanessa's baby shower sat under a magnet on the fridge, its gold letters promising wonder. Claire slid it into the front pocket of her folder so it would travel with the proof it had summoned. She slept that night with the practiced breath of a swimmer who knows the shoreline and the stroke and the depth of her own lungs. In the morning, she stopped by the Laurel Hall under the harmless pretense of inquiring about a future corporate event. She learned where the projector lived, which outlet misbehaved, and where the house lights dimmed to a hush that made screens sing. On the sidewalk, she texted Emily a single word, "Ready," and sent Jenna a checklist with boxes already half-checked. Westbrook moved around her, ordinary and unalarmed, while she walked home with a folder that felt less like evidence and more like a door she would finally open in public, on their stage, at their time, under their lights.
Saturday arrived with the polite chill of a day that pretends to be ordinary, and Claire moved through it like a stage manager. No cape, no trumpet, only lists that fit inside a palm and a steadiness that didn't ask permission. She ate, stretched, and packed the navy dress inside a garment bag along with flats because balance mattered more than spectacle. The folder, now thick enough to resist bending, sat on the table, its tabs marching like small certainties. Call log, bank, workplace, social, prenatal. She opened each once more, not from doubt, but from ritual, pressing a fingertip to dates the way a person checks a pulse. Emily joined her with the density of someone who had grown a year in a week. She'd printed QR codes that linked to cloud backups, a redundancy inside the redundancy, and labeled a small flash drive with a piece of washi tape that read, "In case of power." Jenna texted a photo of a car trunk, extension cords, a power stick, gaffer tape, and a spare HDMI, captioned, "Prepared is a love language." Mr. Reynolds confirmed he'd meet them at the rear entrance of the Laurel Hall and attached a voice memo. "I can read clearly and without flourish. If the room heckles, I will continue. If asked to stop, I will decline. We will be civilized in the ways that count." Meanwhile, Mark played confidence like a familiar riff. He shaved, put on a jacket that telegraphed success, and smelled of a new cologne that had auditioned in other rooms. He hummed while pocketing his phone, oblivious to the quiet choreography gathering around him. "Try not to be dramatic if you hear things," he said, as if drama lived only in the mouths of women. Claire buttoned her coat and met his gaze with a calm that made the room adjust its volume. "I don't do drama," she answered. "I do facts." He laughed because he preferred laughter to comprehension, and left with the buoyancy of a man who believed optics were the same as reality. After he went, Emily hugged her mother hard, then lighter, then just squeezed her hands. No speeches, right? She checked, repeating their pact. Right, Claire said. Evidence speaks. On the drive, stoplights stacked themselves into measured breaths. They passed the Laurel's facade once to watch arrival patterns. Guests greeted by balloons large enough to audition as planets, a signboard that said "Welcome Baby," a projector screen waiting like a blank promise. In the back lot, Jenna popped her trunk. They loaded essentials into a canvas tote and walked the service corridor with the professional invisibility of people who have done unglamorous things well for years. Inside the empty ballroom, a staffer pointed to the AV cabinet. Emily tested ports, threw a test image to the screen, and learned which input blinked. Claire's phone buzzed with a clinic confirmation. The sealed document, chain of custody intact, was ready to disclose if requested by a neutral reader. She forwarded the note to Mr. Reynolds and slid the envelope into the prenatal tab, then to the inner pocket, then to her coat, the way some people carry passports. Through a cracked door, she watched Vanessa arrive in satin, hand to belly, performing inevitability. Mark followed, collecting compliments like coins. Claire closed the door gently, not to hide, but to center. She checked the order of exhibits, practiced a single breath, and pictured the moment everything would leave her hands and belong to the room. Doubt tried a quiet knock and left unanswered. At 5:47, Mr. Reynolds entered, his tie tidy and his expression set to courtroom calm. "Ready?" he asked, and Claire nodded. Not brave, simply done with asking for smaller lives. They took positions the way truth does, patiently. Music swelled, laughter pooled, gold balloons trembled in air conditioning that did not care about anyone's feelings. Emily squeezed her mother's fingers once, steady, present, and whispered the only line that mattered. "We show, then go." Claire exhaled, felt the hinge inside her seat cleanly, and waited for the room to hand her the microphone it didn't know it had already given.
The Laurel Hall was built to flatter arrivals, but when Claire and Emily stepped through the main doors, the room did not applaud. It recalibrated. Conversations dipped. A tray paused mid-air. Vanessa's smile stalled one beat before returning to its mark. Gold balloons floated at aristocratic height. A slideshow idled with a glittering "Welcome Baby," and Mark, already half a head taller on ego alone, shifted as if he had seen a shadow move where there should be none. Vanessa found her voice first, pitched for the crowd. "You weren't invited," she said, turning the syllables into a verdict. Claire didn't take the bait. "I came to settle accounts," she answered, calm as a bank teller. She set her folder on the gift table, where a tower of diapers tried to look regal, and lifted the first document. Exhibit A, Mercy Hospital Call Log. The afternoon I collapsed, the nurses called my husband repeatedly. He declined. She placed the stamped page where eyes could find it. A murmur began the slow work of eroding certainty. Mark snorted, "Context," but context had brought its projector. Emily, steady as a stagehand, connected the cable she had tested an hour earlier. The screen filled with a simple grid. Timestamps of hospital calls, aligned with Vanessa's party posts. Photo, Vanessa perched on Mark's lap, candles half melted. Time, 6:17 p.m. Hospital call, 6:17 p.m. Declined. Another photo, a champagne boomerang at 6:29. Beside it, voicemail. Gasps are not evidence, but they clear throat space for it. Claire lifted Exhibit B, bank statements with highlights like highlighter bruises. Jewelry labeled client gift. Boutique purchases flagged by amounts Emily had matched to Vanessa's captions. Transfers into a consulting account with Mark's private recovery email. "This is our mortgage money dressed in necklaces," she said, without heat. Mark surged toward the table, hand out. Mr. Reynolds stepped sideways, a hinge in a doorway. "Let her finish," he said, voice courtroom flat. Exhibit C, emails from Mark's work inbox, names redacted, tone unmistakable. "Let's circle back over drinks. Be a team player. Close this tonight." A cousin who liked him less than she liked fairness put a hand to her mouth. Vanessa lifted her chin, one palm on the satin curve of certainty. "You're bitter," she announced to the room, "and we're a family now." Claire didn't argue with belief. She brought measurement. She withdrew the sealed envelope and passed it to Mr. Reynolds. Exhibit D, prenatal findings from a certified clinic. Chain of custody intact. I won't read it. He will. The room did the arithmetic of silence. Mr. Reynolds slit the seal with a thumb, scanned once, and then honored every comma. The probability of paternity is excluded for Mark Anderson. An intake of breath swept the hall like a weather front. The slideshow advanced itself to a looping confetti animation that suddenly felt like sarcasm. Vanessa lunged for the paper, scanned and shook her head hard enough to jostle glitter. "It's fake," she said, the word thin against stamped letterhead. Mark staggered as if the carpet had changed its mind about where to be, then reached for anger because it was a tool he understood. "You set me up," he said, pointing at Claire as if pointing could undo math. "No," she replied. "I wrote down the dates while you performed them." Security hovered at the edge of usefulness. They weren't needed. The room had already moved its allegiance from spectacle to gravity. An aunt drew her son toward the exit. A coworker texted herself the clinic's name. A neighbor who had rehearsed sympathy all week rehearsed silence instead. Claire did not deliver a speech about betrayal or mercy or pain. She gathered her exhibits in order, slid the prenatal seal back into its sleeve, and looked once at Emily, who held the remote with hands that did not shake. "We're done," Claire said, "to the table, to the microphones, to the year." She turned, not triumphant, only finished, and the hall parted the way crowds do for paramedics, instinctively making space for the person carrying something that matters. Behind her, applause didn't start.
The room did not clap. It recalculated. And in that recalculation, Mark Anderson discovered there is a difference between being watched and being believed. As emails pinged out of pockets, whispers sharpened into plans, and a manager from his firm, who had attended for networking and cake, opened her notes app to type the phrase, "Initiate review." Claire did not linger to savor it. She closed the folder, tucked it beneath her arm, and walked with Emily through a path that parted without instruction, nodding once to Mr. Reynolds, whose steady presence had been the metronome of a necessary storm. In the corridor, balloons thudded softly against a wall as if embarrassed by their assignment. Outside, the early evening held a forgiving chill. Jenna met them by the service door with a car already warm and a thermos of broth that tasted like care. They drove in a silence that was not empty, but healing, the kind of silence that lets a spine reacquaint itself with its own height. At home, Claire hung the navy dress carefully and placed the exhibits on the table, not as trophies, but as tools to be used again, first in a lawyer's office, then wherever paperwork learns to defend the people it once ignored. Emails arrived quickly, HR acknowledgments stamped with dates, a clinic's confirmation of chain of custody, a bank manager's reply offering a notarized statement about the transfers. Another message from Mr. Reynolds. Happy to read in any room. Across town, Mark tried on apologies the way he had tried on colognes, too late, too rehearsed, and instantly undermined by texts from colleagues advising him to retain counsel. Investors, efficient as weather, withdrew with sentences that did not waste adjectives. Vanessa, bereft of an audience, discovered that the style of love built on conquest is allergic to daylight. Her friends, who loved spectacle more than loyalty, switched to group chats without her. In the days that followed, Claire moved like a person who had taken back her calendar. She filed for separation with a petition whose attachments spoke fluently. She opened a new account, set a standing order for the mortgage, and added Jenna and Mr. Reynolds as emergency contacts. She met with a counselor who did not offer platitudes but practical repairs: sleep hygiene, food as fuel, boundaries sent in writing. Emily, released from the hopeless vigilance of secrecy, applied for a weekend job at the library and taped a handwritten list above her desk titled, "What We Keep." Our names, our address, our music, our peace. Neighbors recalibrated, and the ones who stayed did so with casseroles and rides. The others, who preferred gossip to character, found the threshold of Claire's door newly unfamiliar. At Carradine Logistics, Mr. Reynolds assigned a project that did not mistake competence for indestructibility, and asked legal to document the company's support should any retaliation be attempted. The memo circulated, a quiet shield. On a rainy Thursday, Claire and Emily boxed the artifacts of a house that had hosted both harm and recovery. They kept the photo of a beach day, the ceramic mug with a chipped lip, the blue scarf that had watched her sign the petition, and they left the rest to history. When Mark called to perform remorse, Claire listened long enough to ensure the recording captured his admission that he had declined the hospital calls. Then she ended the conversation without anger, because anger was too expensive, and she had other places to spend her life. That night, she and Emily ate soup on the couch and watched a small, unambitious film. The laughter they found there did not apologize for being ordinary. Before bed, Claire slid the folder into a fireproof bag and wrote a final line in her notes. "We do not argue where evidence can speak. We do not chase love that hides from phones, and we do not bend ourselves around men who cannot show up." Then she turned out the light, and the house, a new house, even if the walls hadn't moved, exhaled with them.